Welcome back to the Red Letter Challenge. This is so awesome. If you're staying up to date on your reading, we are on day 13 today, which begins our week of forgiveness. If you're new to this right now and you have no idea what the Red Letter Challenge is, let me just go through it for you real quick. We are looking at 5 principles that Jesus calls, commands, and asks us to put into practice in our everyday life. Those 5 principles are being, forgiving, serving, giving, and going. You can read them with me right now, okay? So let's rehearse it. Being, forgiving, serving, giving, and going. Fantastic. This week we are focused on forgiving. Let me start off by saying that I'm currently working on a book that I have nothing written on yet, but the book is titled Things I Wish Jesus Never Said. Forgiveness will compromise chapter 1. Let me explain. I love it. I love all the things Jesus has to say about me being forgiven. Because I do a lot of wrong things, okay? I did a lot of things wrong yesterday. I'm probably going to do a lot of things wrong today. And I know I've got plans to do a lot of things wrong tomorrow. I like that Jesus forgives me because of the cross for all those things. Here's what I don't like. I don't like taking what Jesus says about forgiving other people and putting that into practice in my own life. And maybe you think I'm being too honest right now and saying like, Pastor, how can you feel that way about Jesus' words? But I'm not worried because you're supposed to forgive me for everything I say, so I can say whatever I want right now, right? But let me explain to you why forgiving is so difficult for me. When I don't forgive, when I withhold forgiveness from someone in my life, I feel as though I have power over someone else in my life. Let me say that again. When I don't forgive, I feel as though I have power over someone else in my life. That is why I struggle so much with letting something go, because as long as I'm holding on to it, I have power over something. I'm in control of something. This week, while I was looking at this message and looking at this theme, I was wondering how I could show you that feeling that I have. And I came across this TED Talk from 2018. It was from a woman named Sarah Montana. And when Sarah was 22 years old, a 17-year-old boy broke into her childhood home and killed her brother and her mom. This happened in 2008. 10 years later, she decides to do this TED Talk talking about forgiveness and exploring forgiveness and the problem that we all face with it. And it was absolutely golden, most of the words she had to say. And this is what I came across that I just want to share with you today. These are her words.
Our culture thinks that vengeance is freedom, but it is a total prison. Any act of violence, whether it's emotional or physical, is this weird, twisted form of intimacy. That's why the Greeks said that a death by a good man was a good death. Think about it. Every time somebody thinks about my mom and my brother, they think about the fact that they're not here. And then they think about the kid who did this. That one act of violence actually bound the 3 of them together in people's minds for eternity. When we choose vengeance, we're actually signing a blood oath to chain our story to our enemies for the rest of time. Forgiveness is the only real path to freedom.
I like to think that vengeance is the path to freedom, and yet the opposite is true. Just look at our words again. When we choose vengeance, we are signing a blood oath to join our stories to our enemies for the rest of time. So we choose not to forgive. We choose vengeance. We want to get even with people, thinking that maybe we'll have some sort of power. Maybe we'll have control over the events or the people who have hurt us in our life, and yet the exact opposite is true. When we refuse or are unwilling to forgive someone, what we are actually doing is linking our stories with theirs for the rest of time. We're chaining ourselves to them, and we are dragging them with us every step of life that we take. We are bringing them along with us for the ride, and we wonder why life looks the way it does. It's because we are still holding on to things that happened 20 years ago. But maybe it's closer than that. Maybe it's things that have happened 5 years ago. Maybe it's things that have happened last week. The question I have for you today is, who is it for you? Who are you carrying with you right now? Is it an ex-spouse that took you through a super messy divorce? Is it a parent or a step-parent who never really believed in you, who seemed to limit you in all that you did? Is it a friend who said that they were a friend and yet talked about you behind your back or did something to hurt you time and time again? Is it your boss or a coworker who has just done absolutely foolish things in the workplace that have negatively impacted you? If you're a student or if you have memories of when you're a student, is it somebody who has bullied you and talked down to you? We have to be honest with ourselves. We have a really hard time moving through the pain that life puts in front of us, especially the pain that is caused by someone else. And that is why Jesus' words are so hard to follow, because we're still clinging to the possibility that we have power and that we have control over those things in our life, and yet we don't. We have to focus on the words of Jesus here. You heard him read just a few moments ago from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, and in case you weren't paying attention, you're going to hear them again, because I think they're so important, and maybe you'll pick up on something that you didn't see the first time. Here's what we hear. At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery, and they made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in an act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say?" So let's just take a moment to assess what's happening up to this point. Okay, Jesus is sitting there about ready to teach, and these men bring this woman caught in adultery, and they put her before Jesus. Now, there's no evidence that says this woman was married to any of these men. She hadn't sinned against any of them personally, but they want to put her on display. Oddly enough, we still like to do this in life. We like to look at other people and put them as the focal point and say, look at how bad they are, because as long as we're focused on someone else, buddy, no one's looking at how bad we are. We love to point out the sin and the imperfections in other people. If you don't believe me, just wait until the political ads start coming out, right? You don't see anyone saying, I've done this bad in my life, I hope you still vote for me. No, it's look at the other person. Look at how terrible they are. It's like we walk around with a mirror showing other people, look at all your imperfections. And we don't want to turn that mirror around on ourselves, because it's easier not to deal with what's in our own heart. It's easier not to deal with our own imperfections. But here these men are displaying this woman for all to see, trying to make an example out of her. And then they tell Jesus, the law of Moses told us to stone her. Now, I know in California, maybe that has a different meaning to you guys, okay? I'm from the Midwest. We're not into that kind of stuff. But in Bible times, this meant that they wanted to pick up rocks and throw them at her until she died. And this is where things get interesting. Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. We have no idea what he wrote. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first. Now, let me just take a moment to pause. The older ones first, okay? So I'm fairly young, which means that any of you who were born before May 25th, 1991, you have had more time to sin than I have. You are more guilty than I am. You've sinned a lot more than I have. That's why the older ones were walking away first, because they had more guilt. Don't forget that, baby boomers, okay? Don't forget it. Pastor Berkey, don't forget it. I'm sorry, sir. Yeah. Need to make sure I have a job on Monday to come back to. So the older ones left first until only Jesus was left. And then he asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" And if you take a moment to just picture this scene in your head, this woman was brought here, and they wanted to kill her. And now at this moment, none of those men were standing near her. And you can kind of hear her broken voice say, "No one, sir." "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Bask in my grace. Learn that forgiveness comes from me. One of the things I really like to do as I'm preparing for a message or in my own personal Bible study is ask the question, who am I in this story? Am I a bystander? Am I a disciple? Am I a main player? And what I came to realize is that you and I play 3 roles in this. The first one is something that you would expect to hear, okay? We all play the role of Pharisee here. We all are full of accusations. This is nothing new. I wish I could say that this is cultural. It's not. This is who we are as people. This is who we've always been as people. We show up with stones in our hand, ready to be hateful, ready to be vengeful, and ready to be hurtful. We're just waiting for the opportunity to throw it at the right person, right? It's to us that Jesus says, if you are without sin, go ahead and throw the stone. And I can just I like to picture Jesus as a little snarky because I'm a little snarky. And I can picture Jesus picking up a rock and throwing it to their feet and saying, go ahead, pick it up, it's right there. And yet you and I are forced to walk away because we're not perfect. We also play the role of the woman in this, caught in adultery. Maybe adultery is not the sin that you go to, but we all have something in life. And there's times we get caught, and there's times we get away with it. There's times we sin, and we know exactly what we're doing wrong. We know exactly how this is hurting someone else, how this is hurting God's heart, and how it's hurting ourselves, and we don't care. But there are other times where, because sin runs so deeply through our veins that we don't even know the wrong that we're doing. And yet we're aware that we're constantly doing something that is not perfect. And yet as we stand before Jesus, just like this woman did, the one who knows us for who we really are, the one who knows everything we've done in life, the one who has the ability and the right to pick up every stone in this world and throw it at us, he says, neither do I condemn you. Because as we hear in the Gospel of John later on, Jesus did not come into the world to condemn the world, but so that the world would be saved through him. There's a final role that all of us play here, or that all of us should play that we don't recognize, and that's the role of Jesus Christ. That we should be people who stand up for those who are hurting, who stand up to the crowd, even when it's unpopular. That we should be people who teach about forgiveness, not only to our children, but to our friends, to our family, and tell them what it means to forgive others. And we should be forgiving ourselves. Obviously, though, Jesus does something that we can't, and that's he takes all of the world's sin because he was perfect, and he takes it to the cross, and he dies there. And here's the beauty. Because of the blood that pours out of his side, all of our sin is covered. Every single bit of it, okay? This is not Jesus does 90% of the work, and you have to do the other 10%. No, that's not how it works. Jesus' blood covers everything. No matter what you've done in your life, you could have murdered someone. Jesus' blood covers that. If you struggle with lying, listen, confess your sin. Jesus' blood covers that. If you like to gossip a little bit too much, confess that sin. Jesus covers that because he is good. There's no sin that Jesus can't handle. And here's what we learn is that if we are calling ourselves Christians, if we want to follow Jesus Christ, if we want to do what he says, that means we need to start forgiving. And if we are unwilling to do that, we need to evaluate what we're calling ourselves. Because forgiveness is what flows from the cross, and that is what should flow from us. And listen, I know how hard it is to forgive. I know how hard it is. And there are times where you think you've forgiven someone, and then something happens and you realize you haven't. You have to go through this process of dealing with your emotions and then forgiving them again. You should want to do that. And I know it's hard, and you're not going to get there overnight with some people. But we want to follow Jesus because Jesus has shown us so much mercy and so much grace. But it's hard. That's why it compromises chapter 1 of my book, Things I Wish Jesus Never Said. because I want to be vengeful. Deep down, let me be honest, I want to be vengeful. I want to get even. I want to let people know how much they've hurt me and make them feel the same pain that I have felt. But the further I get along in this life, I realize that I cannot keep carrying the stones that I have. The further I go in my life, the more I realize that people and the moments and the events and the words that have happened in my past are dragging me backwards because I've been trying to carry them way too long in my life. And I'm just dragging them with me every step I take. That chain needs to be broken in order for me to live that beautiful life that God has planned for me, that life that is about abiding in Him. We have to cut those chains. The time to forgive is right now. Amen.